Well, hello, welcome again to a reading of 1 Peter, and I got up to chapter 2, verse 18. So it begins, hoi oiketai hypotesomenoi in pantiphobou tois despotais. So now an oikotes, first declension masculine, is a house servant. There are various different types of servants, of course. There's the douloi, the slaves, there's the house servants. We have here, so it's just servants we normally translate it as. So servants, being subject with all fear, that use of instrumental use of N. So with all fear, the house servants being subject to the masters. Now there's no main verb in this sentence, so we have to almost see an order here. We had a whole pile of orders up in the previous section, and we must understand some kind of command here. So it's almost let the servants being subject with all fear to their masters, oumonon, not only to those who are good, and epiakesin. Now this is a dative plural. It's an adjective, epiakes, third declension adjective, meaning reasonable, considerate. And so we've got two adjectives agreeing here with the despotais. Again, first declension, despotes, a master. Whence our word despot, of course. So the servants, being subject in all fear to their masters, or with all fear to their masters, not only to those who are good and reasonable, but also alakai tois skolios, to those who are crooked or perverse. Skolios has the sense of crooked, bent, perverse, those sorts of meanings. As I said, there's no main verb in this, so we have to understand let them be subject to. Tutogar charis, for this, understand the is here, this is grace, if through their, well, sun eidesis often means conscience in biblical Greek and in religious thought, the idea of one's conscience. It can also simply mean consciousness, which it must mean something like that here, or perhaps awareness. So this is grace, if by awareness of God, 'tis someone hypofere might bear with, lupas, griefs, pascon adiko, suffering unjustly. So it's pharaoh with this hupo, sort of to bear under, to put up with. So if someone bears or puts up with their griefs, having suffering unjustly, poionga kleos, for what sort of kleos? Kleos is a very old word, it means glory, reputation, probably more in the sense here of, well, perhaps glory. So what sort of glory is it if sinning and being punished? This is a passive participle from kolophisdo, to punish. So what sort of reputation do you have if sinning and being punished, you will endure it? This is a future from hupomeno, you can tell by the accent here. But if, and again we get a future where you might have expected a subjunctive, but it's a future here for vividness, I think. But if you endure, if you put up with, if doing good, agatha poiuntes, and suffering, you endure it, this, understand, is grace with God. Es tutogar eklethete, for to this end, es tuto, you have you were called. This is an aorist passive, second person plural from Kallio. So for this end you were called, for this reason you were called. Hoti kai, because also Christos epathen, hupa humon humin, hupa lympanon, hupa grammon, hina ep akolutheseti tais ignesin autou. For Christ also suffered, and the variant reading here, this is from Pasco, aorist from Pasco. Christ suffered on behalf of you. I'll just translate it and then come back and say a bit more here. On behalf of you, huperlympanon, literally leaving behind, hupergrammon, a word meaning a pattern or example, having left behind for you an example, in order that you might follow, this is ep plus akoluthio, you might follow in his footsteps. And then we get a quotation. A couple of interesting things here. So Christ suffered on behalf of you, and then we get humon humin. Now this is a literary device. You'll see this in good Attic prose from an earlier period. It's part of the reason why we say that this particular author seems to have been well trained in perhaps either oratory or rhetoric. Having two words in that are the same but in different cases has a technical name. It's called polyptoton. Polyptoton, where you get two words in different cases. It's a stylistic thing which was very common or fairly common in better classical Greek prose writers. Huperlympanon, the lympano is another interesting verb here. Forget the hupo for the minute. You might like to compare this with the verb lambano. The root of lambano is lab, and then in the present you have a nasal infix. Again, it's a mu because you've got a labial. This is a labial nasal infix before a labial pi. In the same way as you get the lambano from lab, you put in the mu and you add the iterative an and you get lambano. Similarly here, this is coming from the root of the verb lapo. The root of lapo is lip. By analogy with lambano, you've got a nasal infix, the mu, and this is a labial nasal before the pi. And then you add the iterative an, and then you form a new verb, lympano. Now this verb also occurs in earlier Greek. It's not a neologism or anything, but it's just an interesting observation here. So huperlympano is just like lapo or huperlapo, to leave behind. And again, they also like to repeat sound patterns, huperlympano, hupergrammon. So all of these, these things I mentioned before, the polyptoton, are examples of this, of literary style that we get in this writer. So just to do that again quickly, an ignesi is a dative plural from ignos, third declension neuter noun. You get ignuo is to track somebody, ignos is footsteps. So it was hoti kai, because also Christ suffered on behalf of you, having left behind an example for you in order that you might follow in his footsteps. Now we get a quotation here from Isaiah 53:9. He who did not, literally make, we would say commit a sin, nor was dolos, guile, found, aorist passive from heurisco, nor was guile found in his mouth. And that's an Old Testament quotation from Isaiah 53. Hos loidoruminos, so he being reviled, now the verb here is loidorio, an epsilon contract verb. This is the present passive, so he being reviled, he did not revile in retaliation for the ante. Greek often will do this. It will take a verb and it'll put anti in front, and it means to do the same thing back to somebody else. So generally translated as in retaliation to. So he being reviled, he did not revile in retaliation. Pascone, suffering, he was not threatening. This is from apeleo, I should say. It's an epsilon contract verb. So suffering, he did not threaten, he was not threatening. Paradiddou, probably middle here, imperfect. He handed himself over to the one judging justly. So, but he handed himself over to the one judging righteously. Hostas hamatias hemon autos anenenken entostomati autou epitoxulon. And he himself, emphatic here, this is from Anaphero, he took up, so he often translated he bore up our sins, entosomati autou, in his body, epitoxulon, on the wood, on the tree. Xulon is just a word meaning wood. You get our word xylophone from this, by the way. So on the xulon, the wood, often it's used a couple of times, I think, in the New Testament as a perithesis for the cross. Hina, in order that, now this is rather difficult here, the apogenomenoi, it's from apogenomai. It often just means having departed, but it's often, I think, translated as dead. So it's having departed. Now after apo, you wouldn't expect a dative, but that's what you get here. So this is generally rendered, it's an awkward phrase, generally rendered as dead to sins. I'm not sure I can do much more with that, just to look at the commentaries on that. Having dead to sins, say somen, we might live. This is an aorist subjunctive from tsao, it's a hortatory subjunctive. In order after hina. Having done that, we might live to or by righteousness. So subjunctive after hina there. Hu to molopi iathete. Now the who is of whom, so whose, so you have been healed. This is a aorist passive from iamai. So you have been healed by the molopes of him, so by his. Now a molopes is a wound left by scourging. Now it is singular here, so by the wound of him you have been healed, literally. Often rendered as a plural, by whose wounds you are healed, but it's literally by the wound of whom you have been healed. Aitigahos probita planomenoi, for you were, going again, this periphrastic used. This is the second person plural imperfect from the verb to be. For like sheep you were wandering. This is planomenoi from planoo. So you were wandering like sheep, but epistraphete, usually rendered you have returned now. This is in fact a passive from epistrepho, but you do get passive for middle in Greek and in Biblical Greek. So that's probably the best way of taking it. So, but now you have returned to the poimena, from poimein, to the shepherd, and to the shepherd and the episkopon, not the bishop, but the overseer of your souls. This is the word from which it's corrupted into bishop, the episkopos, the overseer, one who looks over. you get a verb episkeptomai, to look over, to be in charge of something. So, but now you have turned to the shepherd and the overseer of your souls. And that is the end of chapter 2.